All right. Hello, everybody out there in the land of Facebook. Welcome. For those of you that have been here before, welcome back. For those of you that are new viewers, welcome. Glad you're here. Hopefully you're glad to be here too. Today, we have a very wonderful special guest, trumpeter and composer with us, both for performance and interview. This is the wonderful Thomas Marriott. I've had the pleasure of knowing Tom for many years, and I'm always learning things about life and music and being a parent and a musician and, trying to model my career after Tom's because he's amazing. If you don't know anything about Tom, at the beginning of this post, there's about 3 or 4 paragraphs about Tom and also a link to his website where you can learn a lot more. But anyways, glad you're here, and we'll get things started. So, Tom, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So with all my guests, I like to kind of find out how they got started in music. So how did you begin a life in music?
I mean, the very beginning, I come from a musical family. So in my grandfather's house, there were a lot of instruments. You know, there was a B3 organ and a couple of pianos and a trombone and a euphonium and a trumpet and a cornet and a saxophone and like a lot of instruments because my grandfather played a lot of instruments professionally, and my grandmother was a professional pianist and piano teacher as well. So every holiday or get together was let's go upstairs and play with the instruments, you know. So I always had a sort of sense of playfulness with musical instruments, but I would say the first time I really had the idea to really try to actually play, you know, in any kind of seriousness. My dad had a very large jazz record collection in our basement that he had, been collecting for many, many years, 25, 30 years. He had at one point had a jazz radio program. And of course his records were off limits, because he didn't want to get them beat up. So my brother and I listened to them, and one day at the library, I lived really close to the library, we found one of the albums, just looking through the records, there was a record there that I knew my dad had in his collection. And I thought I would check it out and play a prank and just sort of have it playing when he came home from work. So try to get him to get mad, so he goes, but it's not your record, and it happened to be this record by Dizzy Gillespie. And it was a compilation of all of the classics, Hot House and Salt Peanuts and Shaw Nuff and all that. And I just remember hearing the break on Salt Peanuts, and I played it over and over and over again. I love that break that he plays. So at that point I was like, I want to learn how to do that. It really sort of, grabbed me. And I knew we had horns in the house, and right around that time they were sort of signing kids up to play in band. So that's what I did. My first teacher was my grandfather. He taught me a lot about reading music and how to play the instrument, and then just school band from then.
So what age when you decided I want to play trumpet and your grandfather started teaching you?
6, 7 or 8.
7 or 8.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And now your brother, well, for those of you that don't know, the Marriott Brothers, I remember in high school always hearing about the Marriott Brothers. So there's Tom Marriott and Dave Marriott, and we'll have to get Dave on here as well. But they're both wonderful musicians. And so is Dave older, younger?
Dave's older, yep. And at that time he had already had a lot of piano lessons under his belt, and was Dave is actually, a lot of people don't know this, plays really good piano, has a lot of piano skills. And so at that time, he could read music, and he was into all kinds of music, jazz music and everything. So, and I think right around that time he started playing trombone.
So you guys kind of started playing simultaneously, roughly the same time.
Horns, yeah. I mean, like I said, he had already been, was taking piano lessons for 5 years by that point, So,
so then, what made you gravitate towards trumpet, and what made him gravitate towards trombone?
We had one, and that Dizzy Gillespie record. And actually, he started on trumpet, but at some point, about 6 months in, he was going to a different school. He was in junior high school, I think. But his teacher was sort of like, well, maybe it's not such a great idea that everybody, that both kids play the same horn, and we sort of need trombone players, and we had one of those two. So that's what he did,
So were there any artists that he's like, oh yeah, this is somebody I want to check out? Was your grandfather kind of introducing him to any old school, trombonist? Or?
Yeah, definitely. He was really into Jimmy Lunsford and the Jimmy Lunsford band, and in particular Trummy Young, the trombone soloist, was one of my grandfather's favorite records. And I can't remember. I think the tune was called like Margie or something like that. It was a very sort of famous Trummy Young solo. My brother's gonna slap me for not knowing the name of it, but yeah, definitely, most definitely.
Right. And did you guys? Now I know you're both based in Seattle. Did you guys grow up in Seattle?
Mm-hmm.
You did.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So 7 or 8, starting to play, getting some lessons, playing in school. What year in school did you have like a band program? Because usually nowadays it's like 5th grade is when they start that.
Yeah, school band is like 4th grade, and it's like school, instrumental music. I don't even know if it's really band, but yeah, instrumental music, and then junior high school.
Well, and as many people that live in the Northwest know, I mean, Seattle has a long history of wonderful, not just jazz, but music in general. But it has a long history of jazz. So in all the way down to their junior elementary schools and middle schools and high schools. So where all did you go to school?
Yeah, I mean, they did. It wasn't like that then. I mean, I'm not that old, but they didn't really have. They had something. Well, I take it back. They did. Some of the junior high schools did have jazz programs, but like my brother went to Washington Middle School. But this was before Bob Nat taught there. So I went to McClure Middle School, which is up on Queen Anne, and the music teacher there was named Willie Fisher, and he was Clarence Cox's first drum major. So you have to remember that when Clarence started teaching at Garfield, he was like 23, and Willie was like 18. You know what I mean? So they were friends, and they had a very sort of similar teaching style. Willie went on to go to Southern University as well, and was drum major there as well, which is a big deal there. And so we sort of tried to get a little jazz group going, but it didn't really work out, So I sort of had my sights set on high school. Was supposed to go to Franklin, but my brother was going to Garfield, and he was in the band and all that. So did that.
Yeah. So Clarence has been there forever. And who's there now? It's is it
Jared Sesnick?
Okay. Well, so when you were there and you had a young Clarence Cox, that must have been crazy having him in his prime, if you will.
Yeah, he was definitely in his. I think that's fair to say he was in his prime, and I would say that sort of the band wasn't necessarily in its infancy, but it was definitely at the beginning of its transition into what it is now. At that time, my brother was a freshman. They were doing fundraising by having like pancake breakfasts and selling, bouquets and stuff like that. And then when they sort of made it a goal to try to get the band to play at the Montreux Jazz Festival, because they had been invited many times, but inner city high school and budgets being what they are, that's just out of the question, So some of the parents got together to try to, figure out how to make that work. And that's when the fundraising arm really kind of got big and the program really developed. Not that it was bad before then, but, funding makes a big difference.
So outside of like helping the band travel, what other were they bringing in like guest artists to help teach and mentor and
not so much. I mean, here and there, but it wasn't really a thing. I mean, I feel lucky because at that time, when I was about 13 or 14, before I was going to high school, I was going with my brother down to the New Orleans to hear Floyd Standifer on Wednesdays. We would go to Bud's Jazz Records and just record shop. But we just rarely ever have money to buy anything, but just look at all the sides. And then we'd go catch the first set and hear Floyd and Clarence, because I kind of wanted to get under Clarence's radar a little bit, So that was sort of my main education, really. I would say was that gig, because I ended up becoming a regular all through high school. I went every Wednesday. I mean, almost every Wednesday for years, and would see like Floyd's whole repertoire, which was pretty big. Like he knew a lot of tunes.
Well, and you knew a lot of musicians as well, so I'm assuming when they came through town, they would come and play.
I saw a lot of people sitting in Monk Montgomery, and I saw a lot of people sitting at Larry Coryell came and sit in one night, and yeah, I saw a lot of people come sit in on that gig.
Well, so you're taking lessons from your grandfather. You're in middle school, high school. Now you're in Garfield. Did you have any other private instructors aside from your grandfather as teachers?
Not really. Terry Thompson would come in and teach lessons after school, and I took some lessons with him, but I didn't really have private instruction. My grandfather lived in Port Townsend, so that was kind of not very regular. But I really tried to pick the brain of anybody who would answer my questions and just ask, you know.
Talking with a lot of musicians, we've had several older musicians and younger musicians as well. It seems to me, and I'm curious because you came from a musical family, and your father had such a vast array of albums that you could check out. I got the first question before I get to the other question is: once you were displaying, both you and your brother, an interest in jazz and learning how to play, were you allowed to get into the record collection?
Oh
or
yeah,
no?
yeah, absolutely, and my uncle, who was a jazz fan too, my dad's brother, he had some other friends that were also into jazz, but they were really into bebop. Like that was their thing. They weren't really into sort of earlier music, and they certainly weren't into anything much later than like Giant Steps, you know. So I remember they would send a tape. My uncle would send a tape called the Bop Quiz, and it was like it was a listening test, you know, and it would be not whole songs. Well, maybe sometimes it was whole songs, but sometimes it was just like a minute excerpt. You know, he would like, you know how you used to do to tape the album. And so, yeah, it would be like a mixtape sort of, but also right back with who you think it is. You know, my brother, I was sitting there like, I don't know. I remember there was one that was a Sonny Stitt record where he plays I Got Rhythm, and he plays like, you know, 20 choruses on tenor, and then there's a great piano solo by Barry Harris, and then he plays like 20 choruses on alto. And I was like, well, I think the tenor player is Sonny Stitt, but I don't know who the alto player is. You know, just being dumb at the time, you know. So yeah, we were definitely encouraged, you know, highly encouraged. I'm really grateful for that. Not everybody gets that kind of exposure to the music early. I feel like knowing the albums, or knowing a lot of the albums early, was a real leg up. You know, I mean, I work with musicians, you know, professional jazz musicians now that don't really know the albums, and it's kind of apparent in their playing. You know what I mean? Because the frame of reference just isn't that deep sometimes. And then you play with people who you know all the records, you know, and it shows. You know, knowing the music is a big deal, and it's a big part of what we do. So to have early exposure was helpful, you know.
Well, not just exposure from listening, but knowledgeable people who could kind of guide you and help you understand, you know, check this out and listen to this and check this out.
Yeah.
It's funny how in these interviews, I mean, I kind of have an idea of what I want to do, and then it always goes other directions. But I wanted to ask you, so when you were learning how to play and having musicians as relatives, like I was starting to ask earlier, the older musicians, a lot of them learned by not by so much by learning how to read and doing that, but a lot by listening and singing along and playing by ear. Mm-hmm. Was that a large part for you, or did you do a lot of transcribing and notating it out, or how did you internalize the music?
I don't know. I did learn some solos. I never really wrote them down. As far as playing by ear, I mean, I played a lot by ear because I didn't know what I was doing. You know, like we all do. We sort of all play by ear until we learn about musical harmony. And then we sometimes stop playing by ear, you know, and we just kind of play the stuff that we practice that fits, you know. So also, though, when you play by ear, you just play the stuff that you hear. You know what I mean? So if you practice a bunch of stuff, sometimes that's all you hear is what you practice, right? So, but yeah, I definitely, you know, played by ear. Was lucky to sort of, I think most people fall into a community of musicians, and they sort of learn to play with a sort of a fellowship of people, you know, whether that's people your own age or people that are older and younger, or some combination of all of that. You know, I certainly fell in with my friend Alex Gilbert early on, and Ev Stern, and some other people, and had some, you know, musical experiences where I was trying to learn how to play, and they were playing certain things that I wasn't hip to, and you know, they showed me a lot about music that I didn't know. Definitely things that were sort of outside of what my dad's record collection contained, that's for sure.
Well, I wanted to ask you, and I'm thinking of questions and forgetting them as we're talking, but I wanted to go back to, so you're playing at the New Orleans. You learned a lot from seeing the musicians come and go through the New Orleans. You're playing there.
I mean, I wasn't playing there. I was just in an audience. You know, I was just a regular attendee at the gig, you know.
Apprenticing, if you will. I mean, seeing how things operate. I mean, being around the musicians.
I mean, I would just call it just being a fan. And I definitely felt, you know, there was definitely a feeling of going there when I was very young, of sort of feeling like I found my people, you know what I mean? I think maybe not everybody has that experience in life, but sometimes, you know, you arrive in a place where you go like, yes, this is where I want to be. And so you do whatever it takes to be in that position. And I remember going down there forever, being underage. And when I was finally 21 and I got to go in the bar, finally, that was a good feeling, and I felt like, oh, I have arrived, in a certain sense. But I definitely had that sense of like, this is where I want to be. This is where I want to belong, and tried to belong. So apprentice, I don't know, but I definitely wanted to know more about the jazz life,
Well, and it seems like nowadays, clubs, due to sheltering in place and COVID-19, a lot of clubs are going by the wayside. But even prior to that, Tacoma, when I was growing up, had Red Kelly's, and Red Kelly was an icon and
Sure.
very similar to that situation.
Definitely.
Yeah, and so you had the younger generation coming up learning how to play. You had the older generation as mentors. You had Bill Ramsey's.
Bill Ramsey.
Yeah, Bill Ramsey and his big band, and he had all the guys playing. But you see these places, they're around for maybe 15, 20 years, and they come and go. And I keep having this conversation with people left and right. We just lost the Swiss here in Tacoma, Tula's last year prior to COVID-19.
I just read that Barca is closing.
Barca, exactly. So there's all these places. And I guess what I keep having these conversations with people is the music's not going anywhere. The people that enjoy music is not going anywhere. All the clubs that I grew up in playing have come and gone.
Yeah.
But there's so much value in having those places for people to get together and listen to music and build and form that community. Any thoughts on the direction of how that's going? Or, that's a massive thing that you probably don't even want to touch, but any thoughts about that?
Well, as a matter of fact, I've had a lot of thoughts about it. I don't really want to talk too much about it because it's still very much in its sort of infancy, but it's definitely something I've considered. Definitely the community has been kind of decimated by the affluent nature of the way the Northwest is going. Rents are incredibly high for businesses and musicians and all of that. So that all artists are feeling that in the Northwest and all up and down the coast. And I think in other places what we've seen is there have been large institutions that have sort of stepped up. And certainly the classical music industry, so to speak, doesn't have a problem with that. They don't rely just on ticket sales to produce their art. They get endowments from large institutions, and they also perpetuate their art through huge educational programs and mentorships and things like that in an organized kind of way. In jazz music, we don't really have that. We have jazz education, but that's not even close to the same thing. I don't really want to talk about that too much, but I would say that what we need, in my way of thinking, is, and this could be done very easily, and not to get too esoteric, but Star Trek 3, they have this, or 2, whatever it is. Yeah, Star Trek 2. There's this thing they have called the Genesis Project, and they it's like a missile, and they fire it at a planet that's dead, and all of a sudden, within a short span of time, this abundant flowing of life, right? I sort of feel like our jazz community needs a Genesis Project, something that includes mentorship culture, performing opportunities, a space for people to get together to listen to records, and a place to present new music as well, but also a place for an exchange of ideas. So the mentorship culture part of it, to me, is probably the most important part of it, because that is the thing that has always perpetuated the music forward. I think that we've kind of got off track in a way because of the way jazz education is taught, just because of the nature of academia, is that it is sort of, we think about it all as being we think about innovation as coming from individuals rather than bands. And we think about it as kind of a solitary pursuit. You go into your practice room and you work on your whatever. And I don't really believe that that's how the music was ever intended to be learned, if there was ever an intention for learning it, but that's not how it was passed on for a really long time. And I also feel like the perspective of that sort of singular, the emphasis on the individual is also something that is exclusionary and sort of a byproduct of the way the jazz education sort of views things, because that's how it is in other disciplines, right? So that's good because there's accountability to a certain degree. You have to be able to play a certain level to sort of get your degree, but the actual playing where we communicate and all of that, that has to be done in the context of other people, because that's how it's always been done. So you can't escape playing with people that are better than you. If you want to get better, it's inescapable. But we have a climate here of everybody who kind of wants to do their own thing. So they don't really want to make themselves accountable to other people. Not really seeking that kind of feedback. They're not really trying to be, a part of, they kind of want to do their own thing, and then say that that's innovation because they're doing their own thing, But to my mind, you innovate or you are, doing your own thing in relationship to something else. And if there's no relationship to anything else, then it's just okay. You're doing your own thing. Good for you.
Which is going back to, there's, again, lots of directions I want to go, but going back to clubs, there's been a long history of the Owl and Thistle in Seattle, where, it was a jam session. Hopefully it comes back, that you'd see lots of different players from lots of different styles and backgrounds get to come together and play. Or when I was in high school, and I know you were around at the time because you're a little older than me, not by much, but there was Tula's, and there was a jam session at Tula's. It was every Sunday. It was Michael Bizio, Ruel Lubeg, and Andre Thomas. And I would go up there and get my butt kicked all the time, with these places closing, even prior to COVID-19, I think doing that type of community or fellowship or mentorship or, getting your butt kicked, there's going to be less and less opportunities to do that. So that's the challenge.
It is a challenge. It is a challenge. I think that people who are seeking, you find what you seek. So to those people who are seeking that kind of relationship with the community, they will find it. It does exist. I don't see a lot of people seeking it even beforehand, though, to be honest. So I don't know. It's gone, but it's only not going to come back if people don't want it to. You know what I mean? The other part of I think that you could say is that the pandemic could create an incredible opportunity. There's going to be probably cheap commercial real estate at the end of next year. In places where maybe they got a little, big for their britches in terms of their asking prices and things like that, because they thought that it would always just go up, 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 up. You know what I mean? I think also with everybody staying at home, we're going to really appreciate the opportunity to get together again. And, live music certainly is something that I'm sure we'll all be really happy to get back to. So you're right. The audience is there. The musicians are there. We just need to find a place to put us together, but I think it would be an easy sell in a lot of ways. But there's a lot of opportunities. I do feel like because maybe there's not a sort of flagship jazz room available, that was true for a long time. There were a lot of little gigs, places that had jazz music 1 or 2 nights a week. They had a jazz night, and if there's enough of those, that's even better, to a degree. If you have a lot of little gigs rather than just one place that kind of excludes a lot of people, well, that's okay too. There should be sort of to my mind, there should be sort of a tiered structure of venues. There's places where people cut their teeth, where there's like no cover and there's not a lot of financial responsibility, or it's just not a thing so much, all the way up to people paying $25 and the band getting paid well, and that there's something to strive for. There's something to earn. There's something to work your way towards. We kind of have a situation, just in the music business in the Pacific Northwest, where everything is the same. Everybody, whether you're a beginner or you're a 25-year career professional, it's $100. You know what I mean? And I find that kind of offensive. You know what I mean? I think that's kind of that's part of the problem too, is that that's a good way to sort of hold up mediocrity in my mind. Is that you're basically saying that there's no value in expertise, there's no value in excellence, because you're going to pay the person who's excellent the same as the person who's not. So there's no value in it. So anyway, to my mind, there would be more than just one venue. There'd be a bunch of little venues. We sort of had that going for a second, if you look at it in a certain way. But I don't know. There's a lot of opportunity out there. I think Most of the places that I've seen across the country are jazz rooms run by musicians at this point. I think the days of a really dedicated fan who thinks they can make money on the bar end of it is probably a thing of the past. You know, I just don't see that anybody's going to have that kind of dedication to jazz music anymore. But I don't know.
I've seen, yeah, I mean, there's so many sides to it, and none of us have any of the answers. But I've also seen, and it's both good and bad, you'd have a club owner that wants to get things started and maybe have a shoestring budget, and they'll start something, and then a representative from ASCAP or BMI will come in and threaten to close them down. And I'm all for artists getting paid for their copywritten material, but if you're trying to get a venue started, you'd think that maybe they could work with them on a price to make it manageable for everybody so that they can provide that service. And if instead of closing down the venues, maybe working with them, if they have multiple venues that are presenting live music at a reduced rate, maybe they would have more revenue coming in than just, you know, strong-arming one place. Again, I don't have any answers, but just thoughts that go on in my head.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely part of it. I feel like the Liquor Control Board and their laws and regulations around, you know, liquor sales have a lot to do with it as well. They finally sort of relaxed the rules about having to serve food with hard liquor sales. That's enormous, you know, just to have a jazz room that's just a bar and not have to have a kitchen. You know, that's a game changer. So, you know, hopefully that things change, you know. I don't know about ASCAP and BMI, but
Yeah.
I like getting my checks.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
So
I understand. So, okay, I want to go back. You mentioned we were talking about education, and you just made a Facebook post that it wasn't intended controversial, and I totally understand because I've seen it with my own eyes.
Well, yeah, what I said was, I'll try to be exact. If I see another jazz educator that says, I don't really play jazz, I'm going to get sick, you know. And I would just, you know, a lot of people took it to mean can't rather than don't. You know, and certainly there's lots of people who teach jazz that aren't very good at playing it. I mean, I'm sure people would make the argument that I'm one of them, you know, and so I'm not trying to judge anybody's playing. I just am talking about people where they say, oh, yes, I can teach jazz and get paid for it. But then when it's their turn on the bandstand as an artist, they're like, well, I don't really play jazz. You know, they're choosing to sort of disavow it in a way. So it's sort of the expediency of you're a jazz musician when it's convenient for you, but when it's convenient for you to not be a jazz musician, then you're not. And I see that a lot in our community. I see people write it in print. I see people post that on their Facebook page, you know, or say it in an interview. And, you know, don't be a jazz musician. That's fine. But if you really think that you're teaching it, maybe you're missing something, you know, and I feel like it takes a lot of love to teach jazz music, you know. And if you don't love it enough to play it for yourself, you know, what do you think, how good of a teacher do you think that you are at it, you know? And a lot of people sort of took what I wrote, you know, to say, well, like I teach high school band and I wouldn't consider myself a jazz musician. And I'm like, yeah, but see, I'm not talking about can't, I'm talking about don't. You know, and to me, I just sort of feel like it takes fidelity to learn how to play this music. And if you're not trying to learn how to play it, that's fine. You know, I don't care. But I think paying lip service to it when it's convenient for your wallet, I feel like that leaves people without integrity. You know?
Well, and also, too, I think, you know, if you have the students that don't know any better that are coming to learn are looking to someone for instruction, and if they're not getting that instruction, it actually does a lot of harm to the students because they have a false impression of what it actually is and what it can be.
Well, I think somebody made that point was that, well, you know, their first exposure to jazz is somebody's crummy high school band. It's like, well, maybe it's the crummy high school band sounds that way because the teacher doesn't really love the music very much, you know, to like inspire kids to play it with a certain kind of swagger. I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to judge. I'm just talking about people who say in print, I don't really play jazz or I don't play jazz. You know, people that like win Golden Ear Awards and people that teach at like schools that have the word jazz in them. And that's what I'm talking about, you know.
Well, I think ideally at the end of the day, I mean, I'm a full-time musician. I teach and I perform. And you're the same. And a lot of our friends that we work with are the same thing. And it all kind of comes hand in hand. Performing, writing, being a sideman, teaching maybe a school program, teaching private lessons, all of those things feed into one another and affect one another. And if those things are damaged, it affects us in the end, or anyone that's actually making a living from the music industry, quote unquote. All right, fair enough. Okay, so I usually ask this at the end, but and usually people don't. Sometimes they do, but if you have any questions, feel free to let us know in the comments, and we'll try to get to them towards the end of the interview here.
Somebody be like, "Why are you so jacked?"
yeah. So, anyways, I want to go. You're in Garfield. So after Garfield, you went to University of Washington.
Yeah, I didn't really want to go to school. I sometime in about 1993 or 1994, I started playing every Friday nights with my friend Alex at the Speakeasy in Belltown, and it was like an underage, it was an internet cafe. And I had beer and wine and a little bit of food, but it was pretty much like a big coffee house, and we played there every Friday. I really kind of learned how to play on the gig, learned a lot of tunes, and I was busy. I mean, I was kind of working. I didn't really want to go to school. I just wanted to play. I didn't really have the money to go to school on the East Coast or go to like a conservatory. I just didn't really have that together. I thought about going into the military, and trying to do that route because there's a lot of jobs for musicians in the military. I was talked out of that. I probably should be grateful for that. I don't know. I don't know. I know a lot of people that play in the military bands, and they seem to
Andy
really
Amdahl watches a lot of this stuff too, so watch out.
Well, I mean, I don't know that the lifestyle would have been what I was looking for necessarily, but it definitely appealed to me as a career at the time. I don't know that I would have had the skill to like ascend to any position that I would want to have, but maybe eventually. I don't know. I went to a recruiter and talked about it. It was something I had thought about, but yeah, I was talked out of it and applied to the University of Washington because it was close, and that's where I went to school. I moved out when I was 18. I moved in with Rick Mandyke and Dan Heck and Jeff Harper.
See, I wanted to ask about this. This is the famous house that a lot of people don't know about. So can you talk about that for a little
I don't
bit?
know how famous it is, but yeah, the 411 house. It was a house for musicians on 14th and Harrison for a long way. You know how it is, like somebody rents a room in a house with other musicians, and then other people move out, and then the last person who's there sort of rents the other rooms, and it just kind of continues in perpetuity without a lease, any one person being on the lease. And so Mandyke was like the last person to have the lease from when he had it from other musicians. And Skerrick and Mike Stone were there for a little bit. They moved out. Dan Heck moved in, and then Mike and Skerrick moved out, and Jeff moved in, and then John Wicks moved in. And then Mark Fendel moved in, and then I moved in after when John Wicks moved out. It was a big house.
Wasn't Stuart McDonald in there?
No.
No?
But he used to party with over there all the time. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, good time. It was a dump, but everybody had a couple of different rooms, and I got exposed to a lot of music there. I mean, a lot of music that I would not have otherwise heard. Dan and Rick and Fendel, man, they turned me on to some really great albums that I didn't know about. Yeah, that was a good place to be, And I moved out, and I moved back in, and yeah, it was good. So grades were okay.
Well, and I remember hearing stories about, I think, and you can maybe dispel if I've got this story wrong, but like Wynton came to do a workshop, and he heard you and your brother while you were at UW, and he was very supportive and liked your guys' playing. And Wynton Marsalis, I should say.
Yeah, he played a concert at the UW as part of the Mini Hall concert series or whatever, and Roy Cummings, who was the trumpet professor, got me backstage and introduced me to Wynton. I don't think that he knew him. They just, oh, you should, like you to meet. And I had my horn, it was in Roy's car, I think, and he went out and got it and brought it back, and we played a little bit, and he played, and we sort of kept up an exchange. I can't remember the timing. I believe I had written him a letter. I was a huge fan at the time, and he wrote back a very nice letter back, which is pretty typical of Wynton, I think, So then when he was there, he spent about an hour with me backstage, and we sort of kept in touch loosely. I spoke to him on the phone a couple of times when I lived in New York. I wasn't really trying to, My sister babysitted for him a couple of times when she lived in New York, But it was. He's he's one of those people that like shakes every hand after the gig and stays very, very late and makes sure that everybody has like a a moment of his time, and I really appreciate that. And that's a kind of long-standing tradition. I mean, Pops was like that. Lots of people were like that. Duke was like that. So I think he takes that part really seriously, and I think that's good.
There's the other approach. I mean, Hadley Kalman, whom we both know, is one of my teachers. He has lots of stories about Freddie Hubbard. I kind of get the impression that Freddie Hubbard was not that way after a gig.
Well, Freddie was definitely more of a part of the jazz life. There were no ivory towers for him. You know what I mean? And I think just in terms of venues, Freddie played a lot of clubs. Wynn doesn't play a lot of clubs, and so when you play a lot of big theaters like that, you get a lot of sort of non-jazz folks coming out. And also he's one of those people that's really like his career is based on in large part about being like a virtuoso. That he has Grammys in classical music and in jazz music as well, and a Pulitzer Prize and all of that. So he sort of transcends jazz in a certain way, in the same way that maybe I'm trying to think of somebody who's comparable, maybe like Doc Severinsen or somebody like or maybe even in a more previous day, Rafael Mendez or somebody like that. You know what I mean? So it's a different kind of career.
Well, we've got about 20 minutes left. If anybody has questions, let us know here. I want to talk more about, I had a question for you. When you were at Garfield, I mean, because there were a lot of other great players coming up. So who were some of your contemporaries while you were going to Garfield?
I mean, Michael Glenn was there and his brother. I don't know. I mean, I have to say I wasn't always that sober when I was there, and it's been a long time since then. I mean, I think more about my professional accomplishments now than I think I do about high school. I have to check the yearbook.
What about UW? I mean, because you were living in a house with all these guys.
Yeah, they weren't students there. Obviously, they were. I mean, I learned a lot from them. I learned a lot. I mean, Thomas hired me for my first gig when I was 14, when I was in high school, and I started rehearsing with his big band pretty close after that, So those guys were definitely, very helpful. Dennis Haldane and Marv, Jay's dad, and of course Jay, was a huge early and ongoing, mentor and teacher. You know what I mean? And friend.
So
I feel really, really lucky to have, close relationships. I mean, I've sort of said this before, so it's nothing original, but I really do feel lucky to have a kinship, with fellow jazz musicians everywhere, and I feel the same way. I mean, I feel like it's all part of an extended family. It's not that big a community of people, like worldwide, it's just not that big of a community of people. So you can always find your third cousin out there, in the jazz family. And I definitely feel a kinship with a lot of people because I have really tried. I mean, one thing I would say is that, all of those people, Jay and Floyd and even Clarence, they, and even my teachers at the UW, they were very much of the old school where they were like, you got to go out and pay your dues and you got to go on the road and you got to do those things. You got to move away. And I took that to heart. I really tried to do what those teachers told me to do. The things have kind of changed. That's not a thing that people do anymore for a variety of reasons. But that's what they told me, and so that's what I did. And I tried to. It was hard to do because those opportunities were a lot fewer and farther between in the late 90s and early 2000s than they were earlier. So I feel really grateful that I got on it when I did.
Well, I remember when I was in high school, this is around the end of high school, and going to the Tula sessions. I remember getting in touch with you and wanting to grab a lesson. You're like, oh, no, let's just go get some lunch. And we had some lunch, and I just asked you questions. And like, you gave me a lot of great information. You probably don't even remember this, but I mean, that kind of thing. I mean, nowadays it doesn't seem like there's a lot of people that do that. Like everyone's like, my time is this, and so that was very impressive for me at the time. To be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that anybody who wants to come take a lesson with me would learn from me. You know what I mean? Because I don't know that I have a way of thinking about what I do it's very simple. You know what I mean? I feel like what I do is very simple. It's very explicable. doesn't require a lesson. You know what I mean? I also feel like anybody could pick my brain clean in like 10 minutes. There's not much there. You know,
there was a lot, but it was very informal. I'm like, hey man, I'd like to grab a lesson. You're like, oh, let's go hang, let's go get some lunch, and we did. And I asked questions, and you answered as best you could, and I got a lot out of it. You know,
I'm glad you got something out of it.
So, anyway, and I've seen you teach in workshops, and you have a lot of great things to say that are helpful to students, more than you may realize. So,
well, I feel like there's a lot of jazz educators out there, you know, and I'm not really trying to be one in that sense. You know, I really feel like it's more, but that doesn't mean I'm not responsible for sharing what I've learned, what other people have shared with me. You know what I mean? I feel like that's actually the whole point, is that, you know, if you study with somebody if you take lessons with, or you play in the band of somebody who has firsthand knowledge going all the way back, then you receive that firsthand knowledge from them. You know, so in other words, if you play with somebody, you know, who played in the Basie band for 20 years, you know, they're going to impart some firsthand knowledge from you, not something that's theoretical, and not something that's abstractly written in like a textbook, but something that's like for real, you know. And some of those lessons, you know, like I'm thinking of like New Year's Eve with Buddy Catlett, and we were backing up this singer named Peter, I can't think of his last name, Peter Marshall. You know, he has a syndicated radio program, and he was host of Hollywood Squares or something. Anyway, he had a book, you know, and he had kind of a swingy, jazzy kind of book. And I was sitting on the end of the trumpet section, and Buddy was here, and he had all this, you know, the arrangement with cues and double codas and like, you know, 3 DSs and vamp till this and da-da-da-da-da. It's very confusing. And you know, Buddy just like went through the book, and he had like the set list, and he just wrote the key and just didn't even bother opening the book. He was like, I already know it's going to be a mess, so I'm just gonna play what I'm going to play, you know, and y'all can play what you're going to play, you know. And to me, that was like the greatest lesson of all time. Was like, just stop sweating it, you know what I mean? Just stop sweating it. Play good, and like that'll be enough, you know.
there was a band, and I played in there quite a bit in high school, and I don't know, maybe we played together in that band. It was Tuxedo Junction, Bill Sheehan's band, and the charts were functional. Let's just say the charts were functional, but he always had great players in the band. Buddy always
played in his band,
and
for a lot of reasons.
Joe Bach, any tune, any key.
Brad would play those gigs.
Yeah,
Brads.
or Bob Nixon.
Bob
you know, let's see, Patty Patton. And the saxophone section was either like Bill Ramsey, Tracy Knope, Chuck Stentz,
Mike
Jay.
Edwards,
And just great musicians. And you know, I don't think there's many opportunities like that for younger musicians to be a part of these days. Number one, there's not a lot of bands, and number two, there's not a lot of venues that support
there's that, although that wasn't a band that played venues as much as events, you know. But I think that's a really good point, and I think about this all the time, especially when it comes to like knowing tunes. Like I always hate to be called off guard and like not knowing tunes, so I really try to like to keep together as big of a repertoire as I can. I still feel like it's very weak. Like I need to know more, you know, tunes, because there's always more to learn, right? I mean, there's an infinite number. It seems like. So that's something that I'm always. I forgot where I was going with this, but I lost my train of thought.
We're gonna run out of time, and there's way more stuff I want to talk about, so we'll have to do another one of these. Before we get to talking about New York, we may run out of time. First, does anyone have any questions? I don't see any questions just yet. So I want to talk about.
Oh, I know what I was going to say.
Yeah, go for it.
Just the whole idea about work. You know, if there's no work for people where they have to know tunes, right? Like you're not going to a gig where people are calling tunes and you're expected to know them. Why would you learn tunes, right? If there's no work doing that, what's the purpose of it? And so I see some people that have like their own jam session where they all bring a book and they work on like Wayne Shorter tunes, or they play through Wayne Shorter tunes at their jam session, but they all are reading charts rather than like learning it at home and then going to the session and like calling it tune or whatever. And so like the jam session is the only place where you need to know tunes. And since nobody knows tunes, people are like afraid to go to the jam session, you know, because they're like, well, what if I don't know the tune? I don't really play tunes. How do you practice if you don't really play tunes, you know? And so to me, I always go back and forth. Like I need to know the tunes, but on the other hand, like why should other people, like why is that a thing anymore? Because there just aren't any gigs where people call tunes anymore, you know? And I'm surprised what tunes people don't know. I called Solar on a dude, and he was like, And I'm like, come on, man, really? Yeah. It's like, okay.
For those of you that aren't musicians, you can get like the chord changes on an app on your phone. And you can read all this stuff as though it's kind of like trying to have a conversation with someone, but like reading out of a translator book, or it kind of takes away from being in the moment of listening and reacting to other musicians. Anyways, and it's good. And I heard Jeff Hamilton talking about this one time. He's saying he was talking about like one of the apps that like slows down music so you can transcribe it better. It's good to get you started, but don't rely on it as a crutch, and like, because then it ends up handicapping you from actually learning what you need to do. That's one way of looking at it. I wanted to ask you, I remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, there seemed to be, and I didn't do a lot of the gigs, but I just remember seeing a lot of the ads and advertisements, a massive Latin scene. So there was Latin expression, there was sonando, there was tumbao, there was Nueva Era. There was a lot of, and it seems like stuff was happening all the time. And I know that you were very much heavily involved with that, and you do stuff now with Carlos Cascante. So what happened? Where is all that stuff? Because it used to be everywhere all the time. Can you talk about that aspect of the music industry here?
I could try. I mean, I don't know that I'm necessarily like an expert in it. I will say that in some part, a lot of those bands there were a lot of politics in those bands, and some of those bands wanted to work cheaper than others, and so there was a lot of crossover in personnel with those bands. And I think part of the audience is like the audience would prefer to dance to the DJ. The dancers would prefer to dance to the DJ rather than a live band. For the length of the tune, also, it's the sound in some of the rooms that we would play was not very good. And I think that the novelty of playing with a live band was just kind of lost on a lot of people. So also, I think the change and the style of dance kind of changed as well. So I feel like I think salsa dancing as a fad for people that maybe like white people, let's say, kind of came and went to a certain degree. There's still people that want to go do that, and they're like, hey, honey, let's go take a salsa class and hang out at the Century Ballroom tonight. I'm sure there are people that still do that, but I think it's a lot less people. So for the people who was not a sort of a cultural norm, I guess you would say, there was a novelty about doing it that I think sort of went away to a degree. And in terms of those hardcore dancers that were sort of the core audience, I think, like I said, I think some of the style changed, the style of the music. Reggaeton became a thing that more people wanted to dance to, and again, like it was more about the DJ. Also, economically, it's a little tricky. They used to have salsa night at the Triple Door in the Musicorium, and there'd be like 100 people in there dancing, which is a lot of people for that room. It would be packed. And they'd have a band, and but they stopped doing it because they were losing money because they couldn't sell enough drinks. And that's just one of those things where you're like, well, geez, your outlay for the band is minimal. You get 100 people in the door. It's not our job to sell drinks. That's the bar's job. And just being a patron there, sometimes kind of hard to get a drink, just the way the bar is kind of set up and the number of bartenders and a lot of reasons. Also, dancers don't really they're drinking water. So there's a lot of reasons economically why it didn't work out so well.
That's perfect. I wanted to know, and I knew that you were heavily involved with that stuff.
Kind of a heavily involved, definitely on the periphery.
Well, can you talk a little bit about your association with Carlos?
Sure. Sure, I'll tell this real story rather than BSing for Carlos's benefit. Shoot, he might be looking. We started playing he was the singer in Nueva Era. That was before I moved to New York, so that was about 98 or 99 that we started playing in that band. I moved away, and I moved back, and he had his own band at that time, Tumbao, with Julio. And he invited me to come play. And so I started playing with them, and I've been playing with them since then. I actually don't play in the band anymore. I resigned my position about 6 months before the pandemic for a variety of reasons. But it's just time for me to move on. The band had kind of almost broken up and gotten back together, and almost broken up and gotten back together for a long time. But I mean, it was fun. It's definitely a family. It's the same people, same music, for like 15 years, and so that's great. So I mean, as far as Carlos, man, he's like family. I mean, he is family. He's had Thanksgiving at my parents' house like 5 or 6 times. When he joined Spanish Harlem Orchestra, I was super happy for him. That's probably like the premier salsa band in the United States right now, which is also a scene nationally. That's, the old school salsa is definitely something that's in decline, and Spanish Harlem Orchestra is definitely the pinnacle of that. So for a Costa Rican from Seattle to have that gig, and be favored over all of the singers in New York City, pretty much. That's a big deal. I think that's really speaks to his talent. He's incredible. And when he joined that band, it was and they came through his first tour. It was great to see. I knew a lot of people in the band. I had subbed on the Tito Puente Orchestra a little bit and had some really good friends. My friend Doug Beavers is a trombone player. He was my brother's roommate in New York, and we had many, many adventures together around Rosemary Clooney's gig together. He was on the gig playing trombone, and my friend Hector Colon, who was actually like neighbors with Dan Heck in New York. They lived in the same building. And Paul Gabrielson. They lived in the same building. And I got to know Hector before I ever played a gig with him. He used to come to my apartment for dinner all the time, him and his wife at the time. And John Walsh and Mitch Froman, who was in Tito's band. So I knew I had a lot of friends on the band. And so they introduced me to Oscar. And then the next time they came, they were short a trumpet player, so they hired me. And I played the run with them, and I've done that maybe 5 or 6 times. And I did the whole Canadian tour with them in 2018. Victoria, Vancouver, Edmonton, Saskatoon, Ottawa, Montreal, like all of
Prince
them.
George?
Not Prince George. Yeah. It was great though. It was hard. It was really hard. It's a hard gig. But I practiced really hard for it. It felt good. It was fun. It was fun. It's an incredible band. So
Before we run out of time, I don't see any questions. I have another. We're gonna have to do another one because there's so many questions I still want to ask. But shoot, I just forgot my question. Oh, yeah, I know what I wanted to ask you. So, excellent composer, musician, when not sheltering in place, gigging all the time, doing lots of different things. How do you, as a father of 2 children and a husband and a family man, maintain a high level of playing and musicianship and active in the music community and keep that going? And I have 2 kids myself, and I know it's a lot of work, but I'm just curious, what are some things that go on in your mind to keep all that stuff like stable and balanced? And
yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I would give it up to my wife 100%. You know what I mean? Like that goes without saying. She's awesome, and she does really incredible work, and it's very steady work. So she's awesome. So I would say that's probably like 90% of it.
I understand.
I married up. That being said, my daughter turned 13 this week, and so that's like 13 years I've been a stay-at-home dad. And it's tricky, man, because to have a career is a very self-centered kind of pursuit, and being a father is a very selfless kind of pursuit. And sometimes those things are kind of at odds. There are things I would rather spend time doing, especially now. I'd much rather be sort of trying to write music or practice, but I'm helping my kids with their homework and homeschool and all of that. But the stay-at-home dad gig is tough, but at the same time, it allows me the freedom to pursue other things, And I don't really teach. I don't teach lessons in that sense, so I don't really have like a schedule of students, just because that would be for me one thing too many, because it is just really. It is demanding, being a stay-at-home parent. I think as anybody who is one will tell you, it's a lot of stuff to do. I mean, man, I do all of the cooking and cleaning and the laundry and all that stuff. All of it. And it's time-consuming, but it's it is much better than a day gig, in a lot of ways. It is a day gig in some ways, but at the same time, it's just family, I have a lot of friends that do it at a very high level too. My friend Orrin Evans does it at a very high level. Parent, career, all of that stuff. So I don't know, man. I guess the main thing is to just put everything into perspective. Like when you're super tired. I remember last year I would be hosting the jam session and get home at like 1:30 or 2, and then my kids are getting up at 6, and I'm making breakfast, and then driving my son to school and doing all that shit, and just being like dead. But that's the jazz life, man. That's the life that we have chosen to live. And you have to remember that if we were on tour, that's what it would be like every single day. Lobby call at 6, gig until 11. You don't get to sleep until 1:30 or 2, and then you get up, get on the bus or whatever. So, it's just part of the deal, you know. And I think to remember that, and to be and to remember to be grateful that we're able to play music, you know, and because that is the music is the reward, you know. All the other stuff is the work, you know, but the actual performance, that's what we live for, you know. So all of those other things are just to work, you know. And so we're lucky to be able to do that. I just remember that too.
Before we wrap up, one more question I want to ask, and I ask this of all my guests. In 2020, here you are, you know, today, and you've learned all of these things as a musician to get to the point where you are now, some good, some bad. What are, like maybe you can just, one thing that you've found to be very, very beneficial in your development as a musician, like any sort of epiphanies or things that you've thought that this made you understand music better and make you a better player? Broad question.
I mean, I think the number one thing to me is to get with people that will take you to school, the people that will on the bandstand, the people to get with people that are better than you. It's cool to play with your friends, you know what I mean? It really is, but that's only going to take you so far. And at some point, you really got to conquer that fear, you know, because I think that's what happens sometimes is that we're uncomfortable and we're afraid of whatever it is. And I don't know that I've necessarily gotten a lot better in the last 10 years, but I've gotten a lot less fearful on the bandstand. And I think that's really the most important thing. And I don't know if it's just confidence or it's just like, you know, it actually doesn't matter anymore. I mean, it matters in the general sense that it matters that I'm connecting to people. It matters that I'm communicating. It matters that I'm trying, you know, to make a statement. It doesn't always matter necessarily that I succeed at it to the degree that I think that I should. You know what I mean? Because what I would like it to be and what it might be are two different things, but what it might be could be perfectly fine the way it is. So I've sort of learned to accept the result and not to criticize it. So this sort of letting go of expectations of myself, you know, and the letting go of fear to me has been, or at least trying to, has been probably the most beneficial thing. But again, that it takes a lot of experience, you know, of kind of getting your hat handed to you to realize that it's cool, you know, it's okay. And that's why I say getting with people that are better than you, you know, they're hard on themselves too, and they make mistakes too. I think that's the thing, is like they can be incredible and still make mistakes. I've been, you know, I love that feeling where like the music is so good on the bandstand, like you have to say, well, dang, I'm on this gig. I'm not in the front row, I'm on it. You know, I love that feeling. We're like, shoot, this is the gig that I'm on. And even better when you say, it's my gig, you know? But I've been on enough gigs where I was just like so happy to be there as a sideman. And it was so intense and so exactly what, you know, you hope it to be. And there's mistakes all over the place, you know, and that doesn't ruin the performance at all. You know what I mean? It has nothing to do with anything, as a matter of fact. You know, getting lost or any of that stuff, that's a way of exploration, you know, getting your way back, you know, trusting that they will help you get back. I don't know. So, again, that is something I could only have learned by being on the bandstand with people that are better than me. And you have to sometimes go to extreme lengths to seek that out, you know. And you have to be willing to change your mind about things. You know, so that would be the one thing. You know, there are two things.
Well, let's leave them wanting more. So this is a good place to stop, and we'll definitely, we're gonna have to do more of these. So thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you for the viewers for watching. If we didn't get to your question today for some reason, oh shoot, we did. I missed a question. It's not showing up here. Sorry, Susan. I will see what I can do to get to it later. But yeah, you can leave your questions in the comments as well, and we'll try to get to them after the fact. But yeah, with Tom's permission, we'll do another one of these in the future. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching, and hope you're all staying safe out there. And we're going to take a short break for about an hour, get things sound checked, and then we'll start the concert. We've got several of Tom's pieces that we're going to be playing. I've hastily written out some mediocre tunes for you to check out, and we'll play some other stuff. So hope you enjoy the music, and see you later. Thanks.